Good morning and good afternoon to all of our participants. Thank you so much for joining us. It's my pleasure to welcome you to today's webinar on planning and testing for solar photovoltaic installation in Africa. This webinar is being held by the International Renewable Energy Agency in partnership with the African Renewable Energy Alliance and the European Commission's Joint Research Centre. For those of you who are not familiar with IRENA, we are an intergovernmental agency mandated by countries around the world to promote the widespread and sustainable use of all forms of renewable energy. We have 138 members and 33 states in the process of becoming members. The Joint Research Centre is the European Commission's in-house science service. The mission of the Joint Research Centre is to provide EU policies with independent, evidence-based scientific and technical support throughout the policy cycle. As part of its mandate, the Joint Research Centre contributes to research on sustainable and secure energy supplies. The African Renewable Energy Alliance was founded in 2009 by the World Future Council. It has a member-driven network comprised of 1,400 members from 90 countries and has its secretariat located in Johannesburg, South Africa. Before we begin, we would like to share a quick note that IRENA does not endorse or recommend specific products or services shared within its webinar series. Information in this webinar is featured in the IRENA Renewable Energy Learning Partnership database as just one of many best practice case studies. If you're interested in finding out about future webinars offered through the IRENA webinar series, please visit the IRENA Renewable Energy Learning Partnership website and sign up for our weekly newsletter to receive updates about courses, webinars, and internship opportunities in the sector. For today's webinar, we have two options for listening in. You may connect by computer by selecting mic and speakers, or by phone by selecting the telephone option in the right-hand panel. If you should face any technical difficulties during the webinar, please contact the GoToWebinar help desk at the number provided on your screen. I would like to encourage you all to participate and ask questions by selecting the questions panel in the right-hand bar and entering your question with a note of who you would like the question directed to. We will be collecting questions throughout the webinar and we'll have a question and answer period following the presentations. If you would like to watch this webinar again or share it with a friend, we will have a full recording available on the IRELP website, as well as on the IRENA YouTube channel. If we are not able to answer all of your questions during today's session, and if you wish to connect with our panelists, I encourage you to visit the IRENA community and join the discussion on planning and testing for solar PV installation in Africa, which can be found under the featured topics section. So to quickly review the agenda for today's session, I will begin by introducing our 5 panelists. Following this, I will hand the floor over to our panelists for their presentations. At the end of the session, we will have a quick question and answer period, and then ask that you participate in a quick feedback survey to help us improve our webinar series. So without further ado, I would like to introduce the esteemed panelists with us today. Our first speaker will be Anthony Ighodaro, who is the founding chairman of the steering committee of the African Renewable Energy Alliance and board member of the Alliance for Rural Electrification. Second, we will hear from Wilhelm Zeimann, who is the laboratory technician for the Renewable Energies Unit of the European Commission's Joint Research Centre. Today, Wilhelm will provide an overview of standards, measurement issues of thermophils and silicone irradiation sensors, and extrapolation procedures. We are also joined by Dr. Thomas Huld, who has been working in the Renewable Energies Unit of the Joint Research Centre since 2002. He is involved in estimation and mapping of solar energy resources and modeling the performance of solar energy systems. Today he will share both theoretical and hands-on information on GIS-based assessment for distributed PV electricity. Next, we will hear from Dr. Sandor Szabo, who has been working for the Joint Research Centre since 2005 on renewable energy financial support schemes and the African Renewable Energy Technology Platform on rural electrification and renewable energies. And lastly, we will hear from Nicola Fichot, who is IRENA's Program Officer for Resource Assessment. Nicola has coordinated the development of the Global Atlas for Renewable Energy, a GIS reference platform to prospect renewable energy opportunities. So with that, I would like to hand the floor to our first speaker, Anthony. Anthony, you now have the floor.
Morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be. My name is Anthony Igodare, and I'm the Chairman of the Steering Committee of the African Renewable Energy Alliance, as has been introduced already. But I think the latest really is that our membership is up to just over 1,800 people from 92 countries. First, I'd like to tell you a bit about AREA and then give you the context for our interest in Africa. The African Renewable Energy Alliance is a Pan-African network of individual organizations and individuals who have expertise in and are interested in renewable energy. We exist to accelerate the uptake of renewable energy in Africa, and we do this by promoting knowledge transfer and international cooperation. The online platform is a global platform for policymakers, business, civil society, and academia. For the moment, most of our members come from Nigeria, with the largest contingent, followed by South Africa, United Kingdom, United States, Germany, and Kenya.
Tony, I will just interrupt for one moment because we're having some difficulty seeing your screen. If you could just try and launch your PowerPoint presentation for us.
All right. How's that?
Great. Thank you very much.
Right. My apologies for that. Okay. The area is run by a steering committee, which consists of 15 members, of whom 14 are the individuals pictured there, plus one institution. And we come from 5 geographic areas of Africa: the north, the south, the west, the east, and central Africa. Now, in the last 2 years, and this is where I come to the context of Africa, Africa has become an exciting investment destination. In terms of general business, there has been a lot of foreign direct investment, FDI, coming in, with also quite a large amount of the funding coming from within African countries themselves. And there's currently a large influx of major banks into Africa looking at merger and acquisitions activity. In terms of renewable energy, there have been large projects announced and in progress, namely and mostly in South Africa with the AREA-JRC-IRENA scheme, which has done over 2 gigawatts, I think, to date. Then there's Ghana and there's Morocco. And overall, there are huge prospects because of the demographics of Africa with very youthful growing populations and largely untapped resources. The second factor, which is a global factor, is the huge drop in PV prices, which now means that across most African countries, PV electricity parity against electricity generated from diesel generators has been met. It is now economic, it makes economic sense to produce your own electricity from PV generators in most parts of Africa. Now, to translate that huge prospect into reality now relies on having guaranteed off-takers. In the case of the South African REIPPPP scheme, the guaranteed off-taker is Eskom, the utility company, which has behind it the sovereign guarantee of the country. and they have they have projects lifetimes calculated over 20 years. Now, for the rest of the continent, where there is not presently feed-in tariff, the barrier which has to be overcome is trust in the technology. Trust that if you invest in a solar system, it's going to last 20 years or more, 25, 30 years. And it is this aspect where clearly you see that the fact that there are large numbers of street lights, solar water pumping systems, and some vacuum refrigerators in places like Nigeria, which are not working, where a large proportion of them are not working, this creates mistrust. So these two graphs, which are on the screen here, illustrates the fundamental problem, the reasons for early system failure. They arise in two ways. One is during the design stage, preliminary design stage, from undersizing. What you see there is based on a solar vaccine fridge system in a location in Nigeria, which is powered by the top one's powered by 3 65-watt panels. It gives about 195 watts, and then the bottom one is powered with one panel less. It gives 130 watts. Now, in the case of the lower system there, you can see that the state of charge there has dropped quite low to about 20%, and it's down there for 3, 4, 5 months. Now, in that situation there, which represents serious undersizing, the batteries will have been kept in a state of low charge for such a long time that their recovery has been impaired, and such systems will fail quite quickly. Then, of course, when they have been installed, there's need for maintenance, routine maintenance, obviously being cleaning and checking of contacts, etc. And in practice, most times, in practice and generally, there has not been provision for maintenance contracts. That goes down to systemic problems. Now, you can see that if, first of all, because the systems are essentially sound even when they fail, because the solar panels are basically reliable even when you have had problems in terms of false labeling and importations into the country. But what is dead is the batteries and sometimes the controllers. There have been some field assessments made which in fact show that most failures have been due to human errors in terms of, for example, altering thermostat settings and leading to discharge over time of batteries, so on. And I would like to just skip over the next few points to make, but it's clear that if we can overcome the distrust of technology, which on the one hand is perceived, because if you see a line of 100 street lights and you see maybe 5, 10 not working, it doesn't mean that they're not all working at all. And well, basically here we'd say that you need to have the systems which will be described by my colleagues coming up in terms of optimizing and assessing the amount of power that's to be required, and also you need to set up programs for installer and user training on a continuous basis. that is to say several, maybe a couple of times a year. And finally, national spare parts delivery, where you have batteries under continuous flow charge, which can be rapidly dispatched to various places, remote places. Now on the cover page, there are two pictures shown. One of the pictures was a very remote place in Kebbi State, northeastern Nigeria, where in certain seasons it's possible only to reach there using the camel across very rough roads, and then a canoe across flooded streams. And then on the other side, the other picture was one of Cape Verde, where you've seen a picture of a 5 megawatt solar farm, both of these being examples of remote systems. And of course, these the battery-powered systems are examples of systems which must operate 24/7, things like mini-grids and solar farms. And these larger systems now with much more finance, which are much more expensive, will only work and must be kept working in order to encourage the growth and development of the market if we pay attention to the tools which will give us a more accurate picture. Thank you. I hope you've seen that. I'm sorry that I've had a bit of a failure of feedback on my part, seeing what you do see.
Thank you very much, Tony, for that great presentation. We'll now hand the floor over to Dr. Thomas Hall. Thomas, you now have the floor.
Hi, I think actually according to the agenda I have, that should be Wim talking now. But if you prefer to have me first, it's okay. Hello.
We can have Wim speak first if that works better.
I mean, if the latest agenda says me first, then okay, let's do it.
All right, we'll go ahead
like
and do it. Thanks very much, Thomas.
Okay. I'll be talking a little bit about how our online tool to estimate both grid-connected and off-grid PV performance called PVGis. A little short overview of the presentation. Before showing the actual system, I would like to talk just a little bit about where the data come from, so that you have an idea of what that they are not just pulled out of our anatomy. And I'll talk also briefly about the mathematical models that we're using to estimate PV performance. I'll show you just a single map of this, and then I'll get on to the PVGis online PV estimator. Now, the data that we're using nowadays is almost exclusively from satellite. So we use satellite images, and we calculate the solar radiation at the ground level using those. In that way, you can get coverage everywhere in principle, and you're not limited by the ground stations, which are often few and far between. These data also have the advantage they have hourly time resolution everywhere. The spatial resolution is around 3 to 5 kilometers. So every 3 to 5 kilometers there is one value for the solar radiation. We also use temperature and wind speed data. In this case we're using the ECMWF European Center for Medium Range Weather Forecast. It's the ERA interim reanalysis. I just see here that I wrote something wrong here. The spatial resolution is not as good as I've written here. This is for the forecast data they have, which are not publicly available. The resolution of these data is about 3/4 of a degree, so about 80 kilometers. It's quite coarse. So we're actually now applying a vertical downscaling to these temperature data to take into account the effects of elevation, which we just submitted last week. We supplement all this by module power measurements. These have mainly been done by our colleagues here at the SD laboratory at the Joint Research Center. This is just the references for the models that we're using. We have a model, a mathematical model for PV module power as a function of the irradiance and temperature, which we published here 3 years ago. The temperature of the module depends on the air temperature and wind speed and the irradiance. We're using a model actually originally based from Feynman, but with coefficients from Curl et al. 2011. And also another thing we have to take into account when looking at PV modules is that there is an extra enhanced reflectivity at the modules when the sun comes in at a shallow angle, for instance near sunset and sunrise. And there we use the model from Martin and Ruiz. And then we have made our own model for the hourly performance of off-grid or mini-grid PV systems, because whereas for grid-connected PV systems you can often get away with using long-term monthly averages for the solar radiation. For off-grid systems where you have a complex interplay between the module, the battery, and the consumption patterns, you really need to have high time resolution data, and we use hourly data and do the calculations over a number of years. Just as one example of all these calculations, using the European Meteosat satellites, we're able to cover most of Eurasia, all of Africa, and parts of South America. I'm showing you the whole picture here instead of just Africa, just to give you an impression of just how good the solar resource is in Africa. It's very few places on Earth that have better solar resources than many places in Africa. Not everywhere. The tropical belt is a bit less, as you can see. Apart from having made these calculations, we also have on our website number of static maps you can download. Just showing 2 examples here. We have maps for all European and African countries, and are working on Asia at the moment. These are all available for free to download. You can use them in your publications or put them on your wall if you like. They have been actually quite popular because a lot of people would like to have them in their publications. Now to get on to the actual online performance estimation, PVGis, it's a freely available web-based calculator to make simple estimates of PV energy output. When I say simple, it means that it gives you a quick answer, but you may, especially if you have large systems, you may want to do a more detailed calculation. It's based, as I said, on the solar radiation data from the CMSAF collaboration and other data. It's available for Europe, Africa, and Asia. It also includes the effects of shadows from terrain. So if you have a hill or a mountain nearby and you have shadows during part of the day, this system will also take that into account. The resolution of that is 3 arc seconds, so around 90 meters everywhere. You can do calculations of grid-connected PV systems which use long-term average solar radiation data and gives you a monthly and a yearly annual average of the output you can expect from a given size of system in a given location. You can also do calculations of off-grid PV systems which use the real hourly time series of solar radiation data and temperature. It uses the Google Maps interface, so it's quite easy to navigate around. In addition to this, there's also a non-interactive interface. So if you are able to do a little bit of programming, you can use this interface and get access to a lot of sites in a short while. This is a picture of the interface. It runs, as I said, in a normal browser. Basically, there is a map. You can enter latitude or longitude, or you can enter an address, which, if Google Maps can find it, you can also have it here. And then you can enter a few parameters for your system, and then you basically just hit the button that says calculate, and you get your result. Then you can refine it. You can ask it to optimize your inclination angle or your orientation. You can also ask it to output values for tracking systems. All of this is for grid-connected systems. The off-grid calculator is also very simple, and it's really made for, you could say, small systems with just a battery, a charge controller, and a couple of panels. Again, the interface is quite simple. You enter the size of your components, the inclination, orientation, and then you can either assume a default a pattern of consumption during the day, or you can enter your own. You can upload this as a file, and you get again the something about the performance of the system. There are other tools that can do a more detailed calculation, such as Homer, but this, I would say, is much simpler to use. The output comes out then as an energy output per month. It calculates the percentage of days where you either get the battery completely full, so you're basically not capturing the energy from the sun, or days where you run out of power, so you have a power cut. And it also calculates the battery charge statistics, which can be very useful, as Anthony showed before. We've done all this, but we are still not satisfied completely. We would like to do some more stuff, include the effects of wind speed, which cool the modules and actually lead to slightly higher performance. We're looking at spectral changes in the spectrum of the sunlight. We would like to give access to the full time series of solar radiation data, so that people can use that to do more detailed calculations for themselves. We would like to use to make improvements in the off-grid PV model, for instance, to include inverter-based systems on top of these very simple charge controller systems. And finally, we have a dream of extending the maps to the rest of the world. This will require some collaboration with people, and we're not sure how that will work out, but we're hoping. And that's basically the entire talk. These are the links for the PVGis and the references to the papers I referred to, and to the papers we have written to validate the results, so that people can know that what we're showing is actually has some relation to reality. And with this, I would like to say thank you.
Thank you very much, Thomas. And now we will hand the floor over to Sandor. So Sandor, please go ahead with your presentation.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to carry on the presentation from Thomas. I want to show how this PVGis system we were using in order to evaluate the not the technical performance of the wind grid, but the financial performance of the PV systems in Africa, and we want to get some more insight whether PV minigrid would be an answer of a striking question, which is reflected in the next slide. As you can see from the two graphs that is shown on the screen, in the urban environment, globally the electrification rates are quite getting close to each other. It's getting close to the 90%. Sub-Saharan Africa also improved quite a lot in the 7 years that covers here. But what you can see, the striking figure of the rural areas where the sub-Saharan African electrification rate is lagging behind the rest of the world, and not only the developed countries, but also developed Asia, Latin America, and the Middle East are far ahead of the sub-Saharan development. The main reason when we saw the graph, the good solar irradiation data of the African continent must be lying outside the resource efficiency. Africa has this huge and very promising solar resource, but it seems to be it's very difficult to utilize that. Throughout the presentation, I want to use the levelized cost of electricity as a driving financial phenomena that shows the competitiveness of the PV in comparison to the others, and we try to answer the question whether PV mini-grids could be uptaken in Africa at the same extent like the electrification in the other continents. The levelized cost of electricity shows, in fact, you can imagine this measure. It looks a little bit complicated, this figure, but what it shows is how much a consumer has to pay for each kilowatt hour electricity consumed in order to cover all the cost of the system, including, in our case, 5% of financial cost. You can see that for each year we add together the investment expenditure, the operational and maintenance expenditures, and the fuel expenditures, and then we discount it for each year. We divided with the amount of electricity that was produced in the given year, and then we get a dollar per kilowatt hour or a euro per kilowatt hour figure. With this we can compare the different sources, and we can see whether the performance of the PV mini-grid is justified based on this economic comparison. Before going to the African continent, I just want to show you that financing is not only resource efficiency. When we use this formula, this levelized cost of electricity for the European countries, and we compare the electricity prices to the PV electricity price, we found out that certain countries, even if they are in the north of Europe, are more interesting for investors than countries which have good solar resource, like, for example, Bulgaria, because simply their electricity price is cheaper. So even if you produce less electricity with the same system, because of the computing technologies are more expensive, you can have a good PV market. What is the case for Europe? Using the PVGis figures, what was just introduced in the previous presentation, in 2011 we got these cost figures for the PV, a small PV off-grid system. It shows that in major part of Africa we can get electricity for 30 euro cents per kilowatt. In some part it's even, we can get it cheaper, 20-25 euro cents per kilowatt hour. In other parts a little bit more expensive, but you can see that in a continent where some people pays at the moment half a euro per 1 kilowatt hour of electricity, these prices shows the competitiveness. What we also studied in the three years, 2008, 2010, and 2012, if we have a look, if we apply the same life cycle cost assessment for the technology, the diesel mini-grid and the PV mini-grid, we found out that within these 6 years, within this 4 years, the PV mini-grid has become so much more competitive that, in fact, most, let's say 2/3 of the African countries, these genset are producing sometimes 10 cents more the same electricity. You can see the majority of Africa now is red, which shows that the PV, the same location, produces much more than the overall and at a lower cost than the same location diesel generators, and we think that this has to be reflected in the future development of the PV uptake in Africa. When we also compared not only the diesel and the and the PV, but we also wanted to include the mini hydro option in the picture, and also we wanted to compare the grid electricity in the different countries, whether this is still holds true that in quite a big area of Africa the PV electricity is the cheapest option. We found that this is really true. We can see that near the main grid it's difficult to compete. So the red area shows that the network electricity is still the cheapest. We can see that quite a big part of Africa, the cheapest electricity source is now, after 2012, is PV. This is mainly explained by this graph. As you can see, the PV cost in the last 3 decades has decreased dramatically, and now it offers a very, very good resource and good technology for electricity generation. In the following graph, what we can see is the question what was raised by Tony. Sometimes the off-grid system and the small household system are competing with each other, and the question is, are these two competing technological systems, can they take over really big places in the continent to provide the electricity? What we can see is that the small household system, solar system prices are quite attractive, and they offer a very nice financial scheme that you pay a flat monthly rate, and then you can become the owner of the system after a few years. And we also faced that in quite many countries the system price, when it's measured in watt peak, they are quite attractive. On the other hand, when we were trying to get information on the experience, so the implemented PV mini-grid system, we found out that quite many of those were, if we measure according to the capacity, they were quite expensive. So 2 times more expensive per watt peak than in the previous slide. What we can see here is, as the size increases, it can get close to the SHS systems, the small household system, but which means also that because, as Tony said, this mini-grid system most often provide much more reliable electricity. It can be a competitive option to the standalone system. What we have to know is, lately the standalone system, 28 million people are now getting electricity from this solar home system. What we would like to see if the off-grid system at this cost price could also compete. What our map shows that around between 20 and 30 euro cents per kilowatt hour, the PV, if we calculate the net present value of the PV off-grid system, we see that they become attractive to investors. So our maps where the solar resource is good shows that already without any subsidy, the PV off-grid system can be very attractive and can pay back the investors, even the return expectation, this 5% of it we were calculating with. What is missing that before any investment or any investor goes to certain location to do this kind of investment, they have to ask certain questions. When we calculate the levelized cost of electricity, what was shown in the maps for each location, are the communities where we want to introduce this system, are they able to pay this electricity? And sometimes we have to say that still, because of the low ability of pay of the consumers, there are quite many locations where it's not the case. The question that comes, is the legislation in the given country allow for higher fees in the distributed system? The other, if not, is there any national scheme to pay the difference? Is there, for example, a feed-in tariff scheme introduced? And we know that in Africa, Tony mentioned South Africa, but there are 7 other countries that already has feed-in tariff system, and 8 others are in the phase of policy political discussion, and some of them are introducing this year and the next feed-in tariff system. So in those places where we see that most probably the ability of pay from the consumers cannot meet the system price, I think these policy instruments could be instrumental in order to make the PV off-grid system financeable. What we can see is that different countries already tried to address this problem, and I think if the policy setup is changing in many more countries, this will be a big boom for the private investment, as Tony said, in the PV industry in Africa. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Sandor, and we'll now hear from Willem. Willem, you now have the floor.
Yes, good day, ladies and gentlemen, morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are located, from sunny Italy. My presentation will be a talk about the setup of a PV testing laboratory. It's not easy to set up a test laboratory, first of all, and it's not easy to talk in 10 minutes about how to set it up, but I will give you the major lines which you could follow. This is the overview of the presentation. We'll talk a little bit about standards. Also in the annex there is a list of standards. Then talking about testing or a calibration laboratory, or if you only want to verification of PV devices. Talk about the laboratory, traceability to higher standards, uncertainty, every measurement has an uncertainty, and then finally some conclusions. Standards. For most standards, standards are available. This is a because you can rely on standards, you can follow the standards, you don't have to find out a way of how to measure. 3 major standards are available: the ISO standards, IEC, and ASTM. The ASTM standards, American Standards for Test and Measurements, are more practical. So if you want to set up a test setup, look into those standards. There are drawings, designs, and so on inside those standards. And as I said before, I have a list of standards applicable for PV, solar, and others. These are in the annex, and they are available, of course, upon request. Now let's talk about what are you going to do. Are you going to be a testing or a calibration laboratory? This is an important choice. Testing of PV devices according to the IEC standards. These are electrical tests, but also environmental and mechanical tests. For the electrical test, sure, you need simulators. For environmental tests, you need mechanical climatic chambers and other test beds. Calibration, the question: calibration or performance verification. These are mostly electrical tests, so the determination of the output power versus the incoming light. And one question everybody has to ask himself is: are we going for accreditation? Laboratory accreditation, according to the ISO 17025, requires quality manual, procedures, management, and test procedures, and of course audits. You have to submit yourself to external audits, and you have to perform internal audits. The laboratory, how do you set up a laboratory? Now, you have to think big, because by the time you finish the setup of your laboratory, your modules may have been bigger, higher power, so foresee at least foresee more than in the beginning you think of. The environment, for example, you need space around your test beds just to shuffle around the modules, shuffle around the devices. Separate dark room from a control room. The dark rooms are normally black. Control room is prettier if there are rooms or if there are windows inside. Cabling and instrumentation. foresee always more cables. Mains, computer lines, telephone lines, foresee more, because by the time you're finished, or by the time you think you only want to measure one module, your setup requires the measurement of one module with another reference cell, and so it's easier to have more cables which are flow following than pulling them in later. And the use of standardized connectors, whatever standardized connectors you take, is a pre, because it makes it easier to change between modules, between testbeds, but between reference instruments. And finally, software. Keep track of used software. And what's more important is store files in a unique way. Most of the laboratories around the world are storing their raw data files and data files just in text files, because it is free to change whenever a platform changes. Now, this is an overview of the standards applicable for whenever you're going to do an electrical characterization of a module. It starts with the light source, whether you use the sun or a simulator. It gives information about standards applicable to reference devices on the top part and the modules on the test. And finally, how you treat your data. And then to come to the final conclusion is the typical IV curve, or the determination of your output power. To set up a laboratory, you can choose between indoor and outdoor measurements. You can choose between flash and steady-state simulators. And this gives you an overview. I try to give an overview about the different topics related to indoor and outdoor measurements, and whether you're using flash systems or steady-state systems, or even if you're using the sun. Now, if your size of your sample is around 30 by 30, it can be 20 by 20, or half a meter by half a meter, it makes a huge difference in your expenditure. If you also, not only the expenditure of your data acquisition system, electronic loads, but also your simulator type, and keeping the temperature under control whenever you do it indoors. This is, of course, what's important in the determination of your IV characteristic is that final thing is your uncertainty, your claimed uncertainty. How good can I measure this device? And I gave here, I try to give an overview about your uncertainty in Pmax versus the rough cost. Now, the rough cost is actually very rough, and it can also be plus or minus 50%. But if you want to stay, if you are happy to stay with 10%, and then the price is rather low for your setup. But what is the value of your measurements? If you want to go to 1%, that is very difficult to achieve. There are no laboratories in the world at the moment claiming an uncertainty in power of plus or minus 1%. So everything in between is feasible, and with, of course, the test. Now, these tests are only for the electrical test. Nothing is in here for climatic chambers, UV chambers, and for other tests required for the testing of the lifetime of PV modules. Traceability, we talked about it a little bit in the beginning. It's to ensure that your measurement, that your data which you're sending to your customer or that you're keeping for yourself is traceable to international units. And you need to prove this in order to be sure that your measurement is standing on solid ground, or your result of your measurement is standing on solid ground. The uncertainty is the uncertainty, how good can I, how accurate can I measure? Whether it's the accuracy or the precision. I try to explain this into the image. The accuracy is a systematic error, and it's hard to identify. The precision can be lowered if you repeat measurements, and your measured values vary randomly. Now finally, my conclusions. The setup of the laboratory is a project. I gave it the funny name, FASTI, First African Solar Test Installation. The start is maybe this presentation, and the end will be in kind of an inauguration. The setup can be done in different phases. You can start with the electrical test, for example, so whether you use simulators or you go out in the sun, whether you set up your spectral responsivity measurement or your setup for the determination of temperature coefficients. Of course, environmental tests like climatic chambers, temperature cycles, and damp heat can also be done in phases. And the requirements for your mechanical test is the same. This laboratory, ST, part of the Joint Research Center, will guarantee traceability for all your irradiance sensors. That means whenever a laboratory will be set up, ST, we will guarantee that you can send your devices to us and we will calibrate them for free. Training is very important. The training has to be done on your own setup, so it has to be done on site. It has no sense that you come to a laboratory which is in place since 30 years, because you will find something completely different than in your own laboratory. And instrumentation and equipment, buy them from a local distributor. It has no sense you buy a device far away, and if it fails, you have to send it back, and you won't have it back within short time. Thank you very much. This was my presentation. Now the annex of the list of standards is here. I will go quickly through them. I have no idea if this presentation will be later online, but here are all the numbers and the relevant numbers for most of the tests which regards to photovoltaic testing and pyrometer testing. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Willem, for your presentation. Just before I hand over to our next panelist, I wanted to let our attendees know that all of the presentations will be made available following the webinar today, if you would like to find more information. And now I'll hand the floor over to my colleague, Nicolas Fichot.
Hello, good afternoon. Thank you for attending this webinar today. As an introduction, I would like to say that I'm very glad to be on this webinar with our colleagues from JRC. It's been a long collaboration, and it's always a pleasure to work together. I think you are really achieving great things, and it's really nice to have these presentations today. My name is Nicolas Fichot. For IRENA, work on renewable energy potentials, and I have the great pleasure to coordinate a program that is called Global Atlas for Renewable Energy. And today I will make an introduction to this program and also an insight on the kind of data you can find in this platform we have created. And hopefully you can use this data to prospect a little bit the continent and find opportunities for further development. The program started in 2009 and was initiated by 3 countries at the time through the Clean Energy Ministerial international process. This was Germany, Denmark, and Spain, and they were pushing for the creation of the first global atlas at the time for solar and wind energy. And over time, what happened is that the concept has enlarged a lot, and the management and the coordination of this initiative was handed over to ARENA. So what we did is that we make an attempt to enlarge the scope of the initiative to cover the whole mandate of the organization, meaning all the 6 renewable energy technologies. Also, a number of countries got involved into the initiative, and what happened is that the initiative itself has started looking beyond providing a repository of solar maps and wind maps that you can access online, but also to help countries to do some matchmaking on the expertise on solar mapping, wind mapping, and mapping for the other resources too, and exploring the potentials worldwide. We are not financing measurement campaign, I must say that, but we are helping people to work together in order to prospect the resources worldwide and to channel the needs to donors when it's needed, for example. We also created a capacity building module, and the prototype of this training module is now running. We had a first session for East Africa in Tanzania. Second session is for the MENA region in Egypt next week, and then there will be a session in Latin America in Peru with the Ministry of Energy of Peru. I think this is a great product on training for using the kind of map we are creating to help policymakers to create incentives for the market to grow and to attract investors on their ground. So we have great hopes for this training module. About the initiative itself, as you will see, the Atlas is connected to a large number of initiatives and projects, and this is a non-updated list of the partners we have. There are 50 partners in this initiative that are sharing expertise and data together with ARENA and between the members of the initiative. So you can see this initiative as a very large global matchmaking exercise where the centers of excellence can connect to the needs of the countries or to the needs of the people that need to prospect renewable energy resources. In terms of countries, we had a large support from countries to join the initiative through the setting of organization. In ARENA we have 130 countries that are members of the organization, and 67 of these countries to date have signed the declaration of interest for the Global Atlas, which means that for each country we have a focal point. We have a national institute that we work with, and that is either sharing expertise or sharing data or working with us in order to find solutions for prospecting the renewable energy resources. And it's a great initiative, and it's great to see all these expertise around the table in order to push for the growth of renewable energy. Why was the Global Atlas created? The basic reason was that when you grow renewable energy as a country, you start having a large number of questions, which are due to the fact that these resources are mostly distributed. So basically you need to harvest the resource where it is. This is a resource that will vary over time. This is a resource that you need to locate, and you need to find the most suitable places in order to harvest this resource, to put a project and to connect this project to the grid. So as a country, when you want to plan ahead, you need to know more or less where the resources will be, where the market will go, how big it will be, how much of the industry can come on your ground, and how much socioeconomic benefits you will have, for example. So you need to model all that in order to know if this is worth the investment, if it's worth going for one technology or to another technology, where to start with. And basically you have all these questions as policymakers. So the first thing that happens is that most countries start mapping their own national resources, having an idea of the resource on their ground, but also calculating the energy that they could extract from harvesting this resource. And this idea of mapping technical and economic potential is something that is highly sophisticated, very difficult to do, requires a lot of data that starts with mapping the resource, so the solar resource, the wind resource, the other resources too, but also looking at ancillary data set. For example, you need to know where the grid is, you need to know how is the topography, where are the protected areas, what are the costs of the energy on the landscape, and you need to factor all that in order to have an idea of what is really feasible economically, so that you can then plan ahead for the deployment. So that's why this Global Atlas was created initially. And the vision it would be to give an idea of the technical potential, the economic potential, knowing that the more you take distances from the resource, the more you take steps into technical potential, economic potential, and market potential, as defined by the IPCC, the less standards you have to calculate this potential. So while there is a good understanding on how to have an accurate measurement of the resource and how to have an accurate mapping of the resource, when you calculate technical potential, basically each institute will have its own methodology approach, will use its own constraint or its own methods to assess the technical potential. When you go to the economic potential, you need a socio-economic model, and each institute will have its own socio-economic model. So the more you go, the more hypotheses you make. But even if there is uncertainty on the analysis you make, and even if you want to have accurate results, you need to involve local authorities and you need to go on the ground for validation. It is worth doing it, because the more you climb this pyramid, the more you give a signal to investors, to the market, and you give confidence to the fact that renewable energy resources are there. You can identify the location, you can know how much you can produce, you can know about the cost, you can know if it's competitive, and you are able to give it a value. So that's what is highly interesting in these things. So it's highly complicated, but it's worth doing the exercise. With the Global Atlas, what we aim at doing is to go as far as technical potentials, or at least to give an idea for prospecting technical potential. Because this application is online, is on the web, is giving access to public information, public data, we cannot go yet as far as providing information on economic potential. It would not make sense with such an initiative. But already with the information we are collecting, we hope that you would be able to prospect your potential and have a sense of what is possible on your land. We are extremely lucky with this initiative because, and this is why the initiative is possible, is because over the last decade, let's say, there has been a tremendous improvement into the creation of map of the resources with more and more accurate models and more accurate input data for these models. You also saw an explosion of the business of mapping renewable energy resources, because the market itself was growing and it created a business for companies, medium scale and also large scale companies, to develop their own models and to start selling this kind of data. So what happened is that you find now in the public domain or semi-public information that was not there like 5 years ago, and that is sufficiently accurate not to get an idea of the final value of the potential that you have, but an idea of the patterns that are on the ground. And already with this information, you may be able to have a discussion about the feasibility or the potentialities of growing renewable energy over a certain area. So what you see, for example, on this image is something that was not in the public domain, not exactly in the public domain before. This is a wind map of the entire globe. This is zoomed on Africa, but this is covering the whole globe. This is coming from a private company called Free Tier, and they have shared this map with the Global Atlas Initiative. Why they have shared this map with us is because this map is not their core business product. What they are selling is very high resolution data, and this map is a sort of side product for them. But by releasing this map in the public domain, they have the hope that they would help to prospect new markets and to make advances in the case for renewable energy. So that's why they share this map with our initiative. And maybe many private companies are doing the same. They are sharing part of the information they have and making it available to the public, so that we can progress on knowing a little bit better our resources globally. So the Global Atlas is not providing bankable data. Bankable data for us is the part of the private sector. We think that what we can achieve with the Global Atlas is to provide access to what is available publicly, contact private entities in order for this private entity to share part of what they have in the public domain, so that everybody gains a little bit because we know better what is on the ground. And the rest, the local measurement and the local validation, is the space of the private sector, where you see a high competitiveness, highly competitive environment for private companies and also for laboratories, in order to provide very highly accurate and validated data that could be considered as bankable data, meaning data you can use for a project. So we are not in that space, but we are trying to push the boundaries and go as far as we can in order to provide this data that is not bankable but still interesting for zoning purposes into the public domain. So let's say that we are in the space of policymakers and also companies or entities that would like to prospect without having a final validation on the economic value of a project, for example, but to have an interest in a zone and being able to prospect further on this zone. We have compiled through this project a large amount of information. So in the system, there are now 1,500 or more data sets, solar, wind data sets, bioenergy, grids, roads, population density, topography, protected area, is all available publicly through this initiative. And this is so much information that we started clustering the information under the form of map. So a map is, let's say, a stack of data sets that can come from various data providers. You can have a solar data set that is coming from a university, and we will have the roads coming from a project that is in the Netherlands. We will have the the protected area coming from UNEP, and you will be able to see in one single map all this information and to overlay it in order to make your own prospection. Then within the system itself, you would be able to add more information by seeking into the very large catalog of data, and you can add more layers to the map that we have created, which is a sort of, let's say, startup map, where you use this map to start your analysis, you add more information. You can use tools in order to be able to get access to values or to perform very basic calculation on very basic ideas of the potentials. And you are able to save this kind of map under your own profile so that later you can retrieve it into the system, and you can also share it with your colleagues, for example. So basically what we provide online is not only a large repository of map, but also a tool that helps to explore this map and to make your own analysis. So this is a sample of the kind of data that you will find into the atlas. So on this extract, you have in the corner at the bottom on the right, you have a global map that is for wind energy that I showed earlier. There is still on the last row on the left, there is the Solar Mediterranean Atlas. Above it, you have the Wind Atlas of South Africa, which is a very large project, very successful project, and we are disseminating their data through this viewer as well, and so on. So the data set you see there are described into detail into the data infrastructure. You know where each data set is coming from, you know the source, you know where it can be accessed, when it was created, and also what we try to do is more and more to give indication on the data quality and to give indication of the fitness for use, meaning how best you can make use of this data. If the data is too coarse to make any kind of zoning, it's probably a data set you would use for education, but if you have a data set that is validated on the ground, like South Africa Wind Atlas, for a long period of time, very accurate, maybe you can use that to have a discussion with policymakers and try to find some zones for future development, like the South African government has been doing in the past. How does it work? So the infrastructure is an open infrastructure. So everything we do is open source. That's the first thing. And the second thing is that any data set you see can be displayed through the Global Atlas, but can also be displayed as a web mapping service, which is an open protocol, as a web mapping service into your own viewer, in case you have a viewer that allows to view web mapping services, which is an open standard from the Open Geospatial Consortium. The backbone of the initiative is a catalog where you have all the servers and all the data sets that are connected to the Atlas listed into this catalog, and you can access this catalog online. You can also access all the links, and you can view this data into your own viewer. So here, for example, I have an example where only 3 of the GeoServers connected to the Atlas are displayed here, but in reality we have 30 different servers connected to this catalog and listed into this catalog. And this is an example where the information is viewed through a separate application that is a standalone application. But the same information can be also viewed through the Global Atlas and saved into the Atlas through a map and viewed there. So it's something where we can give more information if you want later. But please keep in mind that whatever information you see in the Global Atlas can also be viewed by other viewers. It's open, and it's something that can be used by anyone. Also, in case anybody has a data set that is validated of good quality and wants to share it with the initiative, it's something extremely convenient to do because we are using an open source and free technology to do so. So we are able to reference new data sets all the time, and what we do on a daily basis is to reference new national atlas, but also new data sets from companies, from institutes that they want to share in the public domain and make accessible through the atlas. The only thing we do not allow for download. This is unfortunate, but we have many, with each data provider we have an agreement on intellectual property, and for most of them we cannot allow for downloading the data because these data have a license agreement, so that's not the kind of thing we can do for the moment. In the future, for open source data set like the upcoming data set from NASA that should be very high resolution, maybe the license could allow for download, but we need to see that on a case-by-case basis. So don't be frustrated if you cannot download the data. This is on purpose and it is due to the proprietary part of the data. But you can view this data into your viewer. You can do that. So this is an example of what you can do with the atlas on Zimbabwe. So in that case, I took this example because the solar map that you see is from the University of Zimbabwe. And what happened is that Zimbabwe is a partner of the atlas, and we found out that the University of Zimbabwe was creating a validated map of the country for solar energy. And to our knowledge, this is the only map that is coming from a local university and that has been validated in the country. So it was published in Elsevier, and the scientific paper is available. And what we did is we contacted the university and said, well, why don't you also make this data available through an interactive tool like ours in the public domain, so that users can also view your data and not only read the scientific paper. So that's what happened there. We share and we disseminate this data set. We promote this data set that was created there. On top of that, what you see is the grid infrastructure that is coming from another project that is from the World Bank. The project is from 2008. That this is not the most updated grid infrastructure you can find, but this is the only one you can find in the public domain for the moment through a tool like ours. And we are trying to get more of this data into the system and to get it updated. It helps you to do, for example, a sort of analysis where you could see opportunities for off-grid application, because we have also there the protected area, and we have another map with the population density. So you can see that there are communities that are very far from the grid where the solar resource can be extremely interesting. You can use one of the tools we have in the Global Atlas, which is a tool called HelioClean that gives access to a very large database on solar irradiation for the last 30 years. And with this tool, you can see that the resource can be interesting for further prospection, for example. So all this is in the public domain, accessible to all. We made a little bit more advanced analysis for West Africa, where we use the data that is in the system in order to see feasibility for off-grid application and grid-connected application for solar PV and for wind energy too. So the idea of this map is not to give an idea of the potential in terms of megawatt or megawatt hour, but is to show where there could be an opportunity to seek for projects in this area by giving a sort of score of suitability. And the score is an aggregate of population density, topography, the resource, distance to the grid, and of course the irradiation, or the average wind speed in that case, so that you are able to discuss with the local authorities and the Rural Electrification Agency, for example, about planning. And that was really the objective of this study, is to discuss planning and to see how the National Renewable Energy Action Plan in the region could be put into motion using this kind of map. Also in the Atlas, we have access, we give access to the data from the JRC. There has been a remarkable work that has been done on PV and diesel comparison with a very detailed map on the competitiveness between these two means of power generation. You see that solar wins in many of the cases, and I would like to commend the work done by the JRC. We probably need more of this kind of geospatial analysis done in the future on the competitiveness of the production means. So this is also a data set that can be viewed there in the Atlas, and it's extremely interesting. I would like to mention at the end of this presentation that we have a user acceptance test that is ongoing right now with a small questionnaire that we have put online. by participating to this user acceptance test, we give you access to the upcoming release of the Global Atlas. So Global Atlas second version. In this second version of the Global Atlas that will be released in January, what happens is that you can basically we improved much the usability of the atlas, so that you need a less level of expertise to use the application. And also what we have done is that we link the atlas to other knowledge platform. For example, we link the atlas to Resource, which is the upcoming knowledge platform of ARENA, where you have country profiles. So with this new version, what you can do in the atlas is not only to prospect the resource, to launch viewers and tools that we are developing right now in order to view the solar and wind resource, and wind roses in case we have wind roses into the system. But also you are able to connect to the country profile of the country from the ARENA Knowledge Gateway resource, and also the REN 21 country profiles and the Regal country profiles as well, so that you can look into incentives and policies. So we help you to further your analysis on not only looking at where it's possible to grow renewables, but also further your analysis on the policy side and the socioeconomic side. So that's what we would like to facilitate by giving access to all this knowledge in one tool, and we hope it will be helpful for the community. Thank you very much for listening to this presentation, and there will be a question session, so happy to respond to any question. If you want to contact us, we created a number of media streams where you can join and you can interact with this project, and we are always happy to be directly in touch with anybody that wants to discuss about sharing data, making this data available to the public, and hopefully improving the service we provide to push further the adoption of renewable worldwide. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nicolas. And now we'll open the floor for questions. Our first question goes to Anthony. Ahmed is wondering, he sees that Egypt is on the map of the steering committee for AREA, and he's wondering who is representing Egypt and what the role of Egypt is in this initiative. So Anthony, you have the floor now.
All right. Professor Salah Arafa from the American University in Cairo represents Egypt, and he's quite active. We had a conference in April this year in Cairo, and we're having another one next April concerned with water and energy resources. Does that answer it? Hello?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Tony. The next question is for Thomas. We have Alvaro wondering where he can read information for the hourly performance for mini-grids. So I'll hand the floor to Thomas now.
At the moment, we have the interface with which you can actually download the data is in, you could say, beta testing. We have not officially released it yet. If you are interested in trying it out, I would say send me an email and we can discuss it. Otherwise, what you get out of the PVGis interface for the off-grid systems is only aggregated values, so averages for each month, and the statistics for example, days without energy or the battery state of charge.
Thank you very much, Thomas. Actually, Thomas, we have another question for you here. This is coming from Peter. He's wondering how detailed the modeling of the PV system is, and does it include the behavior of the controller? So Thomas, we'll give you the floor again.
Well, basically the answer about the controller is no. I mean, it basically assumes that the controller has, it will allow the battery to be charged up to a certain level, and then it will switch off. or it will allow the battery to be discharged up down to a certain level, and then we'll switch off the user. We're working on a more detailed model that also takes into account the interplay between the battery voltage and the module voltage, because when you have a simple system with a simple charge controller, the module will not necessarily be working at the maximum power point, but that is not yet implemented in the online system.
Thank you very much, Thomas. So this next question is coming from Tobias, and I believe it's for Willem. Tobias is wondering, he's interested in establishing a solar PV testing and calibration laboratory in Zimbabwe. And he's wondering if the JRC would be able to assist them in any way, and if you could provide costs for installation. They're specifically interested in testing modules, batteries, inverters, and charge controllers. So Willem, we'll hand the floor to you.
Yes. Now, the JRC, and in its role as JRC, we cannot provide a setup of a laboratory. We can guide, and we can guide an institution, an outdoor and outside institution. We are not allowed to give what we think is good material. That is something out of our control, and we are not allowed to do. But we can, of course, look through a kind of a project and say, okay, there is a bottleneck here and there is a bottleneck there. But we cannot give names for companies to install or to provide special equipment. I hope and otherwise, you can always send email, and then we can discuss this on a more, say, unofficial way. That was it.
Thank you very much, Willem. We actually have one more question for you. This one's coming from Samson. He's wondering if the test lab is for manufacturers or for local testing.
No, the test laboratory, how I described it, it's not for. It is for testing of material, and it is not a testing of manufactured. It's a testing of final products. So it's a kind of a quality check or a proficiency test of modules, whether it's lifetime. When you are going for testing, lifetime testing for modules, that means electrical, climatical, and material, or if it is only to provide the verification of the power, and then it's more an electrical verification lab. And also there, please send email whenever you have questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Willem. The next question is for Nicola. Majid is wondering how you would go about going to the micro level, say 1 kilometer level or 5 kilometers. So what strategy would you use, Nicola?
So if we are talking about solar or wind data, the best spatial resolution we have at the global level is in the range of 3 to 5 kilometers. That is in the system. So I must say that this is a data. This is the kind of data set that is validated. So it's correct to say that it's validated globally against a global network of measurement stations. However, it's not validated locally. So I'd like to make the distinction. So you can't use this kind of data set for project development or whatever. You can have a good confidence into the kind of patterns you find on this data set. So we have several of them at global level. In some cases, we have very high resolution data sets. So in the case of Switzerland, or there is a solar map for southeast of France, there is something in, if I'm not mistaken, 1 kilometer for the whole Namibia. In such cases, this is a sort of, this would be a national atlas or a data set provided by a country in most cases. So this happens to have very high resolution data set if it's provided by the country. Overall, at global level, the atlas is supposed to be more of a prospector to see opportunities, and therefore we would seek to stay at the 3-5 kilometer level, not going into high resolution because of the volume of data it represents. Also, the higher the resolution, the higher the cost of this data and the higher the value, and you enter very quickly into the domain of private companies. So we don't think that for the kind of audience we have and the kind of application, we don't think it's necessary to go at that level of detail. But it can happen that some data would be very high resolution. In that case, it would be provided by, as I say, a national entity or something like that. But it's not the purpose of the atlas, the original purpose, to provide super high resolution data, for example.
Thank you very much, Nicolas. The next question is coming from Murat, and this is a question for Thomas. He's wondering if PVGis can give an average energy generation on a country basis. Thomas, you have the floor.
Sorry, I didn't catch your very last sentence.
Yes, sorry. He's wondering if PVGis can give an average energy generation on a country basis.
The online system does not have that really. We have values for European countries, but we haven't actually done it for African countries. If there is an interest in it, we could do it quite easily. For the maps or the values we calculated for Europe, we actually did a country average, but it was only for urban areas. But for instance, for Africa, if more PV would be installed in rural areas, we could do it differently. Again, it's something that we can discuss.
Okay, thanks very much, Thomas. Maybe Murat, you can get in touch with Thomas directly. Thomas, we'll keep you on because there's another question for you. We have Zahir who's wondering if it's possible to get reliable wind speed data at ground level from PVGis or from somewhere else.
From PVGis, I would say no, not really. I would say the wind speed data that we have from the ECMWF are probably sufficient to give a good idea of the effect they have on PV modules, which is not very strong. But I would not at all recommend to use them to estimate the output of wind turbines, for instance. And I'm not really aware of any other data source, especially not freely available data sources. Although you might try to look at if you have contacts with your national meteorological organizations, whether they are running mesoscale models, there might be output there that at least could be useful. Thank you.
Great, thanks very much, Thomas. This next question goes to Tony, and Tony, Murat is wondering where AREA stands on extending standalone renewable energy technology in rural Africa, and what type of projects you have going on in this area.
Well, standalone projects have been going on for quite a while. In speaking of Nigeria, for example, the first ones in the late 90s were telecom repeater stations in rural areas. then late at the end of the 90s, the first solar vaccine fridges came in. And then, you know, right after the millennium, we've had thousands of solar PV-powered boreholes in place. And of course, since, I would say in the last 2 years, all over Africa, you've had, as a result of the growth in telecom infrastructure, quite a number of innovative approaches where suppliers building on the infrastructure such as payment mechanisms using scratch cards, other remote methods, also the distribution systems for handling those cards, have actually come up with systems which they have placed in rural areas and are expanding quite fast. And the prices have come down quite a bit. I don't know if I don't think I should mention particular brand names, but you've got lantern costs which have now come down below $10. And so increasingly you find that the initial price is not the issue any longer. It's things like the cost of collection. And so given the choice in remote areas of the smaller systems being lanterns, or then small home systems, pico systems, and grid, you know, it's a question of making effective calculations which will depend on the population density, distance between conurbations, distance to the grid, etc. These are some of the issues there. So where does AREA stand? Well, AREA supports these initiatives, and AREA is a platform where people can put their ideas up straight away from the ground up, and they will be considered. And it also believes in aiding international cooperation, facilitating financial participation, creating experiments. We're backing things, we would like to back things like crowdfunding, technological experiments, etc. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Tony. The next question is going to Sandor. This question is from Hannah, and she's wondering if you're aware of any comparison on diesel generator parity with solar PV for Nigeria or any other African country that you could refer her to. So Sandor, you have the floor now.
Yes, I think we use some of the Nigerian data for comparison, but I think we have some contacts in Nigeria, and maybe Tony also can help in it. If we get an email from the question, we can send her the contact details about the diesel prices and how it was compared to the PV generation.
Thank you very much, Sandor. So the next question is for Nicola about the Global Atlas. And we have a question from Alois, excuse my pronunciation, and they're wondering if there's any information on Global Atlas for Rwanda and how this can be accessed. So I'll hand the floor over to Nicola now.
So thank you for this question, Alois. So for Rwanda, I was looking into the system right now. So there is no national data set like coming from the government or from a national institute. However, you would find a number of regional or continental or global data sets. I can name a few of them. You will find a wind map from the Spanish Center on Renewable Energy, CNR, and they have shared with the Atlas a wind map of the African continent that is 10 kilometer resolution at 10 meter altitude. You will find a wind map from Fritier, the private company I was mentioning earlier, which is at 80-meter height, which is 5-kilometer resolution. For solar, same map from Fritier with a 3-kilometer resolution. You will find the HelioClim also solar map, which is a bit coarser resolution, like 20 kilometers. However, the archive in that case is very deep, and you can launch an analysis tool to get the values every 15 minutes for the last 30 years. So it's probably helpful to see the variability there. And also there is a company called Meteonorm. They have shared a solar map with us, which is it's a recent addition we had, and this is also one of the datasets you can find. If you take the time to open the link on my presentation, where at the last slide where I mentioned the user acceptance test, there is a link. If you open this link, you will go to the questionnaire for the UAT. In this questionnaire, you have the link to the new platform of the Atlas that will be released in January, and there you can search for Rwanda directly in the country menu, and you will be able to see everything we have that overlaps with Rwanda. You will find a few maps there. I would recommend to open the map we created for East African countries. We have compiled a few data sets there, and from the Atlas then you will be able to search in the catalog and find more in case you are curious to find more data sets. So that's all I can say. So but we don't have national data. That's the thing to remember. It's regional or national or global data sets you will find there. Hope it will help. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nicolas. And unfortunately, we're running out of time now, so we'll wrap up our question and answer session. But I would like to remind all of our participants today who didn't get their questions answered to join our discussion on the community, and we'll have all our panelists participating there, so you can continue the discussion following the webinar. So before we conclude today, we'd like to ask that you take part in a very short survey to help us improve our webinar series. So you will see a series of pop-up questions come onto your screen, and you just simply need to select your choice. So we'll launch the poll now. Thank you very much for your feedback. So before we end our session today, I would like to invite you all to connect with IRENA on social media. So you can follow us on Facebook or on Twitter. Again, you will be able to find recordings of our webinar series on our YouTube channel and continue the discussion from this webinar on the IRENA community. And lastly, I would like to thank all of our panelists today. We are very grateful for your excellent presentations, and of course, thank you very much to all of our participants. And with that, I would like to conclude today's webinar. Thank you very much and have a great day.